walk at an orderly pace. So everybody's going to be, because we've got microphones here, people are recorded, but in terms of people doing deputations, you won't be filmed, but we'll only hear your words. So, colleagues, Anna, are we live and real? Okay, so we've had apologies from Councillor Barrett, but who is here in an ethereal sense, and we'll run through the agenda. But before that, we need to just go through, and everybody needs to be introduced for just so that we know who people are for the record. So I'm Gerald Thurn-Jackson, I'm leader of the council, and I'm chairing this meeting. Peter.
Peter Ball, still City Solicitor.
Richard Webb, here representing Chris Ward.
And for people who don't know, Chris Ward is our Chief Finance Officer who is in Las Vegas with our money, or he's on holiday in America somewhere. Colleagues, here to deputations.
Martin Silman, Portsmouth Landlords Association.
Dom Owen, Democracy and Campaigns Officer for the Students' Union.
Darren?
I'm Darren Sanders, I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness.
Ben Dowling, Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure and Economic Development.
Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education.
Hugh Mason, Cabinet Member for Planning Policy.
David Williams, Chief Executive.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Andrew Waggett, Head of Energy.
Chris Atwell, Cabinet Member for Communities and Central Services.
Dave Ashmore, and I do the community safety and environment things.
Councillor Jason Fazakli, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Adult Social Care.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
Sam Rickard, Housing Regulations Manager, Private Sector Housing.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director Housing.
Teresa O'Toole, Head of Housing Needs Advice and Support.
Lauren Taylor, Ash Sleeping Manager.
Stuart Palmer, Strategic Project Manager.
Wayne Leighton, Finance Manager.
Christina Downey, Climate Change.
David Evans, leading on Armed Forces Day and Falklands 40th.
David Morman, Strategic Development Manager for Sports and Leisure.
Adrian Rosier, Service Manager for Parks and Open Spaces.
Phil Bentley, Head of Estate Services.
Cal Corkery, Labour Councillor for Charles Dickens Wards. I'm here to give a couple of deputations, if that's okay. I know I asked late, but hopefully that will be accepted.
Cal, it's always a pleasure to see you here. It's nice that somebody from one of the other parties turns up, so it's good to see you.
Someone's got holidays booked out.
Absolutely.
Peter Shelley, Transport Development Manager.
Okay, I think that's it first. So I think we're going to move to the carbon report, if that's all right. We have mountains of papers, and I just need to see if I can find it first in these mountain of papers that I've got, James. So, but Christina, do you want to jump in, and then we'll do Kimberly?
Yeah, of course. Okay, yeah, apologies, it is quite a long report, but we're providing a bit more detail on our approach to the new climate change strategy, some information on how we're going to calculate our minimum targets for future carbon reduction, which we're calling the carbon budget, and some of the current pipeline of projects that we will be implementing to reduce carbon. So I need to say this report is a bit of a, not Frankenstein's, but it's been pieced together from a number of existing publications, but does include some new information and data from the draft climate change strategy, and some new information there from the new carbon action plans, which are being developed for both the council operations and the city as a whole. So if you haven't found it, this report also includes some information about the new sort of architecture of the strategy, with the overarching strategy sitting on top. It's going to be supported by a carbon action plan sitting underneath, and both of these action plans are going to be annually updated from here on. We are quite transparent here on the process that carbon management will now be taking on an annual approach, so this is what we'll be doing internally from here on. We've reiterated the importance of the council as here as a major employer, a public service provider, a buyer, a landlord in the city, and our importance here in contributing to carbon reduction and to the general climate challenge. We detail our current carbon emissions inventory for the city, as well as, I'm going to reiterate this, the word draft emissions for council operations from the latest year. And I really need to state heavily that these are very draft values at the moment, and I'm updating them as I get new information as to our operations. So once we have both sets of data finalised, I'll then be able to model two key scenarios for us. The first is a business as usual model, which will include only sort of national level drivers, such as decarbonisation of the grid, gas boiler bans, etc. And the second is our carbon reduction scenario, which includes our sort of pipeline of committed projects and programmes that we'll be implementing from here on. I'll also provide some information on our new carbon reduction initiatives that will be recorded, investigated, and ultimately how we will prioritise them. We've provided information on the success, on lots of previous and current carbon reduction actions that we've done and we're doing, and the impact we've already had on our carbon emissions, as well as addressing other locally important issues such as air quality and fuel poverty in the city. What else we got? And finally, we just provide a bit of information on the areas that we'll be focusing on to meet the new climate challenge now. And these areas are across travel and transport, buildings and other infrastructure, business and the green economy, waste and consumption, natural environment, and importantly, engagement and partnerships. And that is about it.
Thanks very much, Christina. Kimberly, are you still there? Come in, Kimberly. James, what have you done with Kimberly? If not, Susie, did you have Kimberly's words? I think we might have to go to Plan B. Hold on, I thought she was still online. My apologies. Any joy, James? Kimberly, are you there?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Oh, lovely. Okay, Kimberly, the floor is yours.
I will try this again. Sorry, everyone. So I'm really pleased that I've been able to bring this report to Cabinet. This administration will have done another first in producing this carbon budget and strategy for the city, with the aim to not only reduce our own emissions and make financial savings, but also to make savings in our carbon. And we also need to maintain a trajectory to our net zero target in the UN Paris Agreement. By producing this report and updating it throughout the year and presenting it to you all annually, it will also benefit our residents in regards to their long-term health, something that is extremely important and often can be forgotten in the grand scheme of things. You can see that we've made significant changes in the past 10 years to reduce our carbon emissions, and it can be seen in the report where it talks about the initiatives we've worked on from 10.8 of the report to 10.17. We've investigated the decarbonisation of our own council buildings, the installation of energy initiatives across domestic properties, and increased our provision of solar technology. We've updated the greening strategy and intend to increase green infrastructure and tree canopy levels across the city. We've also invested in upgrading LED lighting and are part of the Voice scooter trial, which has resulted in less car journeys, big savings in carbon in general. But we are looking to do so much more. Our officers are looking into even more complex things that we can do as a council, such as looking into IT transformation in our data centre, something that will be reported to cabinet meetings in the near future, and that will also result in a net reduction in carbon. I really think it's important to note that the report mentions to be able to develop future estimates of carbon emissions, it's so important to develop the business as usual projections based on national changes. If we don't take any action to reduce carbon, then that's not good. So that's why we use this measure. We can determine the impact of any carbon reduction initiatives that we can implement, and also allows us to look at these projections and therefore develop alternative projections regarding our proposed carbon action plan for the city that Christine has mentioned. These action plans can be updated and published on an annual basis, which is what we will do from now on. Factors that will be monitored will include financial cost per volume of carbon saved, would aid accountability, and we should also be able to see any environmental co-benefits and socio-economic benefits coming forward. As mentioned in the report, we will continue to apply for funding opportunities from the government and lobby when needed. We will continue to collaborate with our partners, work with the Climate Action Board and Green Groups, and add to our existing initiatives and projects to further reduce carbon emissions. We need to do all of this and make sure that we have significant investments for future projects to continue that downward trend we've seen on the decarbonisation graph in the report. I'm sure anyone that's looking at this report can see the huge amount of work that's already gone into reducing the carbon budget and strategy. My thanks go to our new Principal Strategy Climate Advisor, Christina, and those who have been supporting her for all the hard work that's gone into this. It's so important to acknowledge that this has been a cross-portfolio and a cross-department piece of work, with all the areas of the council working together to share the data and information and the policies and practices that we have as council. I'm sorry that I can't be there, but I want to also thank the rest of the cabinet for their involvement as well. A piece of work like this needs to have collaboration. It's been great to work with so many different people and departments on this carbon budget for Portsmouth. So I really hope that colleagues will accept the report today, and I look forward to all the further initiatives and what we've got planned for the future. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kimberly, and our best wishes to you to get better soon.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to both you and Christina for all the incredibly hard work to do this. I think it's a real milestone for the City Council to have a report like this that recognises across the whole council what the impact can be, but also the work going on with other major employers in the city to be able to work together to be able to drive down our carbon footprints across everything we do. So many thanks to this. Colleagues, anybody else on this? I think we'd all be incredibly supportive of this and really happy with the work, and I think it's a vindication of the decision we made to have a portfolio looking at this across the whole council. Colleagues, are you okay with this report? Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, I am told we need to do 2 more reports quickly because this James sitting down here needs to disappear off to do something else. So we've got Armed Forces Covenant and then gas contract next. And they're both urgent things because things have moved so fast. So the first is the Armed Forces Covenant. Caroline, welcome. Is there anything you need? And I understand that the need to do this quickly is because there's legislative changes that mean we have to do something that is different now than we had before. Caroline, is there anything else that you need to add to the report? Okay. Okay, colleagues, are you happy with this? Just to reaffirm our commitment to this? Okay, thanks very much indeed. Gas contract, James and Andrew. Andrew, are you going to lead on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If it's all right, I'll read the recommendations more or less verbatim because they are quite lengthy and there's obviously a fair amount of financial risk.
And Andrew, just to make for it to be clear, the reason this is coming to us urgently is because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that we therefore need to review our gas contract. So that's the reason why it is a late item, but it's really important. Andrew, sorry.
Yes, thank you. That's right, and I can go into a little bit more detail subsequent to reading the recommendations. So it's recommended that Cabinet consider the content of this report and the option to terminate the contract with Gazprom in compliance with the contract conditions referencing termination. That the Cabinet determine if they wish to exercise the option to terminate the contract with Gazprom in compliance with the contract conditions referencing termination, and if so, instruct officers to serve notice to terminate the Gazprom contract effective from the 30th of June and to end the contract on the 30th of September 2022. That the Cabinet delegate authority to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with the S151 officer and the City Solicitor to give authority to terminate the contract with Gazprom in compliance with contract conditions referencing termination. That they delegate authority to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with the S151 officer and the City Solicitor to commence a procurement exercise to confirm a new supplier from the 1st of October 22, focusing on sources on a sourcing route that does not that fundamentally excludes Gazprom from taking part in bidding for that contract. That the Cabinet ask officers to continue to work with external partners from central government, from the LGA, from the Local Government Association, third-party intermediaries, brokers, energy brokers and peer authorities to highlight issues and suggest remedies to the situation that this and other councils find themselves in regards to Gazprom contracts. We are not the only council which finds ourselves in this circumstance. That the Cabinet that a request be made to put a paper to Cabinet at the next available meeting in the new municipal year to provide an update and to detail the total known costs of exiting the Gazprom contract ahead of its full term, reflecting the market conditions and costs which will only be clear at the point of termination. That we note that the Cabinet note that the events in Ukraine and the conditions in the gas commodity market remain extremely fluid, and note the availability of the Chief Executive's emergency powers to be used should matters change materially in the coming weeks, in the absence of the ability for Cabinet to meet like this during PERDA, etc. And following the full council meeting on the 15th of March 22 and discussion on the matter arising, so last Tuesday, from an emergency member's question by Councillor Boscher, the leader is asked to write to our energy broker to ask that they waive the fees associated with contract termination, or that they consider donating that fee to an appropriate charity in support of Ukraine.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I think, along with many other organisations, we find ourselves with a contract with Gazprom that we, because of the invasion, we just don't want to be associated with. I understand that's 20% of the non-domestic market in the UK. I've been in contact with people in government, and I know the LGA has been as well, about the government and Ofgem changing regulation or changing their view on whether Gazprom is an appropriate supplier or not, and things may move, and there's potential for it to move quite quickly in the next few days, and that would be the best thing to happen, because then that would get us out of this contract much, much sooner. So we hope there is action from government on this quickly. But if not, then I think it's for us to decide whether we want out of this contract early. We can't get out any earlier because legally we wouldn't be able to do so, but we'd want to get out at the earliest possible opportunity. But I think it is beholden upon us to make sure that we are not putting money into the pockets of Mr. Putin and the Russian state for our purchase of gas, and we need to do everything we can to get out quickly. colleagues, anybody want to come in on this? No? Okay, is everybody happy with Andrew's things? Thank you very much indeed. And Andrew, if you need to come back quickly for something, do yell, because we can have a meeting when required. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, if you're all right to go back now to the published agenda and to run through that as is. So the first thing we've got is the additional licensing report, and we have two deputations from that. We have three deputations, I think. Martin Silman, Dom Owen, and Cal, are you wanting to come in on that as well? Okay. So if we start, can we do the deputations first and then come to you, Paul, if that's all right? Okay. So, Martin, you're closest. Do you want to go first?
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors, and thank you for the time. You probably never expected, those of you who know me, never expected me to say this, but HMOs are a big problem and you need to do something about it. I don't think anyone in the city is currently happy with HMOs, wherever they are on the spectrum: tenants, landlords, neighbours, councillors. I know a lot of councillors that are not happy. My personal problem is terraced houses, small terraced houses that get turned into 7 or 8 bed HMOs. It's gross overdevelopment, and I think you guys should do something about it. I know a lot of people object because of the parking implications or the perceived parking implications of HMOs. Others worry about rubbish. All of these are valid. All of these need something doing if something can be done. However, additional licensing won't fix any of those problems. Additional licensing only affects 3 and 4 bed HMOs. You already have mandatory licensing citywide for any HMO bigger than 4 beds. So if you think you're going to solve all these problems that people complain to you about by going ahead with this consultation in this form, you're wrong. And we're going to be here again I was here 10 years ago arguing against additional licensing for all the same reasons. It doesn't fix the problem. I'm here now. I'd really like not to be here in 2032 doing the same again. Just a couple of other points before I shut up. Part of the sell that you'll get from council officers for additional licensing is that mandatory licensing is working. I don't believe it is. Factoids that they'll throw at you, such as 35% or 30% of mandatory HMOs fail the safety regulations. If I may use the council leader as an example, when we had this discussion 10 years ago, your house failed because it had no heating in the kitchen. The then standing MP's house failed because he had no heating in the toilet, and I think Alan Cuffley's failed because of his open plan staircase. The key point is HHSRS is very specific, and the typical house won't meet it without some modification, and all this is picking up those modifications. So don't let statistics fool you. The only other thing I'd say is that I'm not sure I need to say any more, actually. Additional licensing will not fix the problems that you're trying to fix. You need to do something, but not this. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Martin. Dom.
Thank you. For this agenda point, I have a few starting words, and we will be presenting some recommendations and potential actions consequent to the recent HMO survey. This is in Appendix 10. We believe that there are significant instances of subpar living standards in Portsmouth due to the prevalence of rogue landlords, and this is the first step we should take together to fix this. The aforementioned rogue landlords in Portsmouth are clearly presenting a dire threat to the collective living conditions in Portsmouth. As a unique and diverse coastal city, we should be one of the first to pioneer this great cause by strengthening licensing, and several measures have been enacted to start this process on a larger scale. There is more student-specific data arriving over the coming months, alongside a report. Previously, not enough students were consulted for a fully reliable piece of work. Numerous meetings have taken place with other organisations, PCC councillors, PCC administration, the University of Portsmouth, some of our local MPs, There's broad support from various people on either multiple or all of our recommendations. One instance of where strengthened licensing could have helped is one that I faced last year. In this case, a student's house's ceiling collapsed due to poor structural integrity, coupled with poor maintenance. The student tenants in this HMO were forced to live in hotels for weeks on end, with dire impacts on their education, mental health and financial well-being. This is not acceptable. Mandating maximum repair times reduces the amount of time people are homeless subsequent to disrepair. Boosting the prerequisites for a HMO licence means that this is less likely to happen, since a more in-depth inspection would have taken place. Also, by taking the landlord's history of renting into account, they may have spotted previous concerns, which may indicate ongoing problems. This case is one of many that happen each year. These, in conjunction with the recent survey, support the upcoming consultation. I'll briefly go through our document, which has broad support from numerous stakeholders. You can find this in Appendix 10. So, recommendation 1, HMO licensing should be strengthened. That's why we're here. One way you could do this is by necessitating 3-year renewals instead of 5-year renewals. PCC should also enhance the criteria for regulations by setting more stringent specifications for building standards and taking history into account in terms of HMO landlords. Receipts should also be provided by landlords for deposit deductions as a condition of a HMO licence, specifically deductions for cleaning and repairs. Recommendation 2, there should be stricter policies on HMO repairs. It's a prevalent issue, shown in a massive proportion of tenants saying that repairs are delayed or that they feel intimidated by their landlord when asking for such. This can be done by mandating repairs to be completed within a specific time frame, with penalties for those failing to meet them without evidence. Recommendation 3, there should be better reporting structures favourable for students. This is both PCC and UOP. Recommendation 4, landlords proven to be responsible for subpar living standards should receive harsher penalties such as fines. And then recommendation 5, as a community we should do more to increase community cohesion. People don't like students. People get fed misinformation about students when it comes to housing, and it's not always the student's fault. So that's it from me.
Dom, thanks very much indeed. Cal.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it might be worth just starting off with a short potted history of this issue. So going back to 2018, when this administration changed the previous policy of requiring smaller HMOs to be licensed, at that time apparently there wasn't enough data or evidence to support it being continued. I've kind of called that into question, and I mean some of the evidence that we're presented here today around, for example, 32% of HMOs that are being inspected are found to have Category 1 hazards. Has that all of a sudden shot up massively in the last 4 years, or has it been an ongoing problem all along that this administration didn't previously see fit to prioritise and address through the use of licensing? Then comes 2019. The Labour group put forward a number of motions to full council on this issue, trying to pressure the administration to take the course of action they're now taking today. People may remember the charade of half of the council having to leave because they were either landlords, a lot of them were landlords by the way, or tenants. I noticed that isn't an issue that's come up again today, so it just seems to me a little bit ironic perhaps that when the opposition is trying to push forward a policy, these kind of technical legal issues come up, but when the administration wishes to put it forward, they don't seem to be so much of an issue. So those motions, I think, eventually passed in heavily amended form. So the administration was tasked with going away and reviewing this. Then the Labour group followed this up by including in the 2019 local election and the 2020-21 local election within our manifesto a top election pledge to prioritise implementing landlord licensing or rolling it out even further, as it should be, to trying to keep up the pressure on this, resulting eventually in the administration bringing forward the private rented sector strategy, which did include within that provision to look at whether landlord licensing should be rolled out again. I will say at that point that Although additional licensing, which is what's before us today, so the additional licensing of smaller HMOs in addition to larger HMOs was considered, something that was ruled out at that time, apparently on the basis of lack of evidence, but again, I'm not too sure whether that was the case or whether it was a political decision, was the licensing of non-HMO properties within specific areas or across the whole local authority, as other councils around the country have done. And I think if that were to happen, that could help drive up housing standards even further. And then more recently, we've seen the Students' Union really take a lead on this issue, driving it to the top of the agenda, bringing forward some really useful recommendations that I'm happy to support and would ask for them to be given proper consideration. So let's just look quickly about what licensing does. I think there's some key aspects of it that it's worth reflecting on. Firstly, and a really key one for me, is this requirement of anyone who is licensed to own or manage a HMO being a fit and proper person. Surely that should be a requirement of renting out any type of property that the landlord is a fit and proper person. Without that requirement, it means that anyone, so someone with a really significant criminal history or involved in other forms of predatory or dangerous behaviour, can go out tomorrow, buy a house, move people in, and then there'd be very little oversight over how they're managing that property and looking after the people that live there. So I think everything we can do to ensure that everyone who is managing a property or owning a property is a fit and proper person should be done. One way of doing that is by rolling out landlord licensing. I think the other significant thing it does is it gets our council officers behind closed doors. So there's proactive inspection of properties and conditions that allow them to address issues. Again, as we've seen in the report, 32% of properties they go to under landlord licensing schemes have category 1 hazards that need to be addressed. I know it's been remarked on that sometimes there may be technicalities, but the law is there for a reason, and I actually think that law is quite a high threshold. I've been to lots of properties which I've then reported onto private sector housing who have gone out to inspect, and despite the property being in really clearly poor condition, they've said no, it doesn't tick the technical boxes that it needs to. So I think it's a high threshold to begin with, and if 32% of properties aren't meeting that high threshold, then clearly there's a significant issue that we need to address. And proactive inspection is the way to do it. We can't put the onus on tenants to say, oh, well, you should have reported it, you should have approached the council, because we know who are the groups that are least likely to report or cause an issue. It's those that are vulnerable, it's those that are on low incomes, it's those that may be worried about their immigration status. They're not going to cause a fuss. The council should be stepping in and taking a proactive approach to ensuring that everybody lives in a safe and a decent home. While I support the rolling out of additional licensing to smaller HMOs, as I think should have been the case throughout, and it was the case throughout before the policy was reversed by this administration in 2018, I do think that there's a couple of missed opportunities here. I think we need to look again at selective licensing, so the licensing of non-HMO properties. And I think that has, for an example, recent bit of casework that's been very high profile, Windsor House. Appalling, unacceptable housing conditions. It's not a HMO, so it won't be covered by additional licensing or the other landlord licensing schemes. If there was a selective licensing scheme in place for that area, it would have meant that all the landlords, the leasehold landlords in that property, would have had to meet fit and proper person tests. We know for a fact that a significant minority, or perhaps a majority of the landlords within that block would not have met that fit and proper person test. So the council would have had more powers to get in there and sort the place out before it had to go into the national media and suddenly, all of a sudden, things start happening, although it's still not been resolved, I will say. And just quickly, in terms of licence conditions, I think this is another thing that needs to be looked at. Bringing in place the landlord licensing scheme is one thing, but we need to look at what the conditions are of those licences. Appendix 2 states that licence conditions could be used to stipulate the property of a condition, but these stipulations around property conditions are not then included in the standard licensing conditions, which I think are in Appendix 8. There's reference to Category 1 and Category 2 hazards, which are, again, the legal minimum threshold. But my understanding is that licensing conditions can be used to go above that basic minimum threshold and ensure that people are living in safe and decent homes. And if that is the case, that's something we should be doing. We should be making these licensing conditions as stringent as is necessary to ensure that everybody is living in a safe and a decent environment. So just in conclusion, I'm very happy to see this report come forward today. I would have preferred if the policy wasn't reversed initially 4 years ago, but there we have it. I think it's going to be a big benefit to tenants in a city who are living in smaller HMOs to have their properties licensed, so there's proper regulation of the conditions they're living in and who's managing and owning those properties. But I do think we need to look at going even further. I think we need to look at selective licensing so that people who live in self-contained accommodation can also benefit from the enhanced tenancy rights and protections that come with landlord licensing. And I think we also need to look at the licence conditions to ensure that they're as stringent as they can be. Thank you.
Cal, thanks so much indeed. And I think you have a good point, and we haven't declared interests, colleagues, and we should have done. Having consulted with Mr. Balfe, I think anybody who is either a tenant or a landlord of an HMO needs to declare an interest, but they can continue to, Mr. Balfe, to take part in the discussion. Okay. Mr. Daz.
Thank you, Gerald. I'm a tenant of a HMO that has an existing licence, so therefore I don't believe it is a prejudicial interest, or in fact a personal interest, but I declare it in the interests of openness and transparency.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? No? Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks very much, colleagues, for your deputations. Paul, are you going to launch in? And I think there are one or two questions that that have been brought up that you may be able to address in your opening bits.
Okay, I will try. So, good afternoon. Firstly, just to say this report was supposed to be brought by Claire Hardwick, but she's not available due to COVID restrictions. So I'm going to be presenting the report today, but I'm supported by Sam Rickard, our housing regulation.
Wish her well.
I will do, thank you. The purpose of the report is, as has been outlined, to examine the need for additional licensing controls in houses of multiple occupation, known as HMOs, and if that need is determined, to outline the process for undertaking consultation. As the Cabinet will be aware, there is a lot of information here, including a lot of appendices, so I will just give you a very brief summary of that information. So, as has been outlined, a property is a HMO if at least 3 tenants live there, forming more than one household, and facilities such as bathrooms and kitchens are shared. We have no certain way of knowing the overall number of HMOs in the city, but we estimate it's currently at approximately 6,000, so that means that at least 18,000 and probably higher number of people in the city are living in a HMO at the moment. We're currently licensing just over 1,200, and that they are properties where there are 5 or more tenants, and they are required to have a licence by law. And this report brings forward the proposal for additional licensing, where we would license HMOs with fewer people in. All HMOs, regardless of licensing, must comply with a range of management regulations, and they're laid out within the report. And in addition, the private rented sector strategy, which was brought forward last year, set out a specific action to consider additional licensing, which is why this report is here. So, as has already been said by the deputations, additional licensing can be introduced if there is significant evidence available to show that a large proportion of HMOs are poorly managed or are having a significant adverse impact on members of the public. Section 4 of the report outlined the impacts of HMOs in the city on tenants, landlords and residents. I won't intend to go into all the detail, but to say that that is a combination of national and local data that we have gathered, as well as a public survey which was undertaken from December of last year through into January of this year. And the report does outline the various impacts on all 3 of those groups. So additional licensing won't resolve all issues related to HMOs. So when considering the introduction of that licensing, we must consider whether we can be confident that it will introduce a scheme which will have the intended impacts upon tenants, so that it will be proportionate, correctly target areas of high concentration of HMOs, deliver those benefits for tenants, landlords and residents, and stand up to scrutiny. And if the Cabinet believes that it will, then we would move towards a consultation on that, and detailed in Appendix 5, 6, 7 and 9. Consultation on additional licensing doesn't mandate the City Council to proceed with such a scheme. The results of that consultation would return here for a final decision before that scheme was introduced. And the only other thing I wish to add at this stage is on the consultation process. So the purpose of consultation is to inform those likely to be affected by the designation of additional licensing. And the information that would go out would include the proposed scheme, the areas which we have proposed is for the whole city, evidence of why the scheme is necessary, explanation of what the proposed scheme involves, and the fees and potential licence conditions. And we're proposing that the consultation would start on the 23rd of May. So the recommendations are as outlined in the report, and I'll pause there, but happy to take any questions.
Paul, thanks so much. I think there was one issue that Councillor Corkery brought up that I thought would be useful to address, which is, do we have the power to be able to have a licensing system for all rented accommodation and the ability to have a fit and proper persons test for all landlords across the city?
The issue of selective licensing, which Councillor Corkery raised, was examined through the private rented sector strategy, and within that strategy it was felt that the evidence base both here and nationally didn't point in that direction, but it felt that there was more of a case for additional licensing, which is why we've brought this forward. So the legislation...
Well, that doesn't answer my question. The question is, can we do it, not did you decide if we wanted to
yes,
or not want to do?
Yeah, the legislation is there to do selective licensing, yes.
Okay, colleagues. Anybody? Daz?
Thank you, Gerald. I support the Council consulting on resuming additional licensing for small HMOs across the city. I have many points. I've heard most of the deputations before, I have to say, but I want to start with Cal's interesting approach to the history of all this. I brought in additional licensing in 2013. It was never for the whole of the city, unlike the proposals today. It was for the PO1, PO4 and PO5 postcodes, because that was where the evidence suggested the problems lay. So I brought it in 2013, and I have to say, when we resumed power in 2018, I was fully expected to carry on, because I wasn't satisfied that the level of HMO, things had improved in the level of HMOs across the city at all. And so to be informed by officers that the only way we could actually continue with it was to prove that in fact it had failed, which is what we were told, which was government's rules, not the desire of anybody in this administration, not least me, I have to say it was a source of some sadness to me, as officers well know. So since the government rules, however, not the desires of this administration, stopped us from doing this in 2018, the situation has changed. Gerald, you and I both know about the horrific super HMO application for 83 Margate Road that came to the Planning Committee recently. And that showed how planning rules for permitted development could mean that a smaller, unlicensable HMO could become a bigger, licensable HMO without anyone knowing. That, to me, drives a complete coach and horses and makes a total mockery of the existing distinctions that exist. And that's one of the things that I suggest to Martin is a real difference. The HMO survey, as people have said, that we commissioned, shows that HMOs are nearly 3 times more likely to have the worst hazards than other privately rented properties. That scandal must be tackled. This is one, not the only one, way of doing it. I must thank Dom Owen for his report and his presentation today. Having reviewed it, it's a really excellent report. And the interesting thing about it is it highlights many issues. Everyone living in HMOs, students or not, tell us exists. They tell us that people won't report problems, partly because they're scared that their landlord's going to chuck them out. And if you're a neighbour, partly because you're scared you think nothing's going to get done. That has to change. People, neighbours, tenants and landlords need to know that, and the good landlords need to know the council is on their side. and approving this report today will help us do that. If the consultation comes back and we pursue additional licensing, it will give this City Council more people to help enforce HMO issues across the city. It will provide more tools to help it do that job, and I believe it will give both tenants and neighbours more confidence that something will be done. Martin's points are actually quite fair, and he and I know we've discussed this once or twice previously. This isn't the only answer. The private rented sector strategy, one of the few examples of a holistic approach to tackling the private renting sector in the country. The only other one I know is Greater Manchester, and that's the 10 boroughs of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, is a very comprehensive way forwards, including a mediation service that is already helping people in this city while the government's equivalent scheme has failed. I come back to other points that Cal raised as well, and you've also raised too, Gerald. This form of licensing, unlike the selective licensing scheme that Cal mentioned and we've discussed quite often in this chamber, does have the state of the property as part of the licence. If we introduced a selective licence scheme for all non-HMOs in the city, that isn't part of the licence, which is a bit of a problem, as that is the main reason why councils have brought it in across the country. And they are not very happy that suddenly they discover they can actually tackle things like the appalling state in Windsor House. That will not be part of a selective licence. I find that disgraceful and immoral, but that is the law, and that makes, I think, the judgment that was put forward in the private rented sector strategy quite sensible. But doing it with additional licensing does do that, and that is vital for making all HMOs be like the best, and something I would support, including in any final licensing scheme that we approve. Now, we could also bring this in now without consultation. That would look great on an election leaflet, I have to say, but could mean that, like other councils, we lose a court case. We want to get it right, and that means involving people, not dictating to them, and that's why I've got a group together to look at doing that before the consultation starts. I may have to make a couple of changes to the recommendations to do that, Gerald. That will also cover the points Dom makes in his report earlier on. Some of which we've told will be hard, he's been told and I've been told, have been hard to implement. But in that, community cohesion is absolutely key. We cannot have one group of people against another. As a result of that group being established, I would ask Cabinet to allow drafting changes to the consultation documents to be agreed before consultation starts by the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with me. That's especially for the standards documents, which are highly technical, but actually if you get them wrong, you will get a lot of anger. Renting privately has to be easier and safer if people are to feel confident it's for them. That means carrots and sticks. Mediation service, still working long after the government scrapped its one, is already an amazing carrot. Approving the report today will show this council can provide the sticks too. Thank you, Gerald.
Okay, colleagues. Anybody else? Susie.
Thank you. So, I think I just want to say a few things. Some of it's been covered, but I'll pick out a few things. I'm a councillor in Central Southsea Ward, and I live and breathe this every single week. And I've learnt more this year about the complexity of the issues than I have in the previous years. I want to thank people doing deputations. I think they were really excellent, both of them. And I want to focus my comments more about the culture rather than the actual pieces of information that we've been debating. And I want to start off by saying that not all landlords are bad, and I think that gets drowned out in this debate. But landlords make money, and many make money by renting out properties that they would not live in or want their families to live in. And that is a really important part. I'm a landlord, not in Portsmouth, so I don't have to go an interest here, and I pay a licence, and I consider myself to be a good landlord. If my tenants contact me, I throw money at it because I don't live near them, and I pride myself on the fact that I would respond within a day and get things sorted out. I don't mind paying a licence, because I think that if I can be a good landlord and other people aren't, then my money may go towards raising those standards. So I think in this debate, we sometimes drop into stereotypes about what landlords are like or not, and what tenants are like or not. Coming back to my point about doing casework in Central Southsea, I have equal amounts of casework of residents living near HMOs who have issues with HMOs, but also balanced out with doing work with a lot of students and people living in HMOs who are actually on the receiving end of bad treatment and feeling powerless to be able to actually do anything about it. And that's why, on balance, notwithstanding the points that Martin made, and I take those on board, that on balance I support this because I think that it can indicate a direction of travel around the culture and what is acceptable and not acceptable. One of the pieces of casework I did this year involved me liaising with the letting agents, liaising with the tenants, trying to get access to the landlord through the letting agents, with the university, with Portsmouth City Council officers, and I have to say, Cal, I have got many examples of officers really doing a brilliant job, so I do think we need to be careful that we actually give credit where it's due on that. With planning, with licensing, this is one case, by the way, with licensing, with the Safe, Clean and Tidy team, with the noise team. Some of these issues are really complex, but when you start trying to unpick them in this tangled ball of wool, what you realise is that actually that somehow people have been allowed to get away with not being held to account. And I believe that if we have licences, it will raise that base level. So I accept that it's not a silver bullet, that these cases aren't easy to solve, that just by introducing a licence won't solve every single one of them. But it's a message that's going out there, which I think is really important. The people know that the HMO thing, to some extent, is out of our hands with the loophole between C4s going to super HMOs. But actually, the casework's not just about rubbish and noise. The casework's about, for example, helping students who cannot get their deposits back when they moved into a shockingly bad house, the case I'm talking about, where they can't cook, because if they cook, the paint falls off the wall into their pan. And that was the case in August, September, October, November, December. We're right the way through till March, and I think the work has just been done. That also has involved probably 40, 50 hours of my time, as well as officers' time, etc. That is unacceptable. Are all landlords like that? No, they're absolutely not. But this will go some way to protecting and increasing standards in the city. And I absolutely support that we should move forward with this consultation.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think my view is that the City Council should be on the side of good landlords and good tenants. And we should be using powers that we do have and can have to be able to push bad landlords and bad tenants to do better things so that they cause less problems for everybody else. I think this is a step in the right direction as it's a consultation. I think Dom's stuff is very helpful to be able to feed into that and to see where we go with that. We have to be careful. We, as I understand it, we have to show not that we just want to do this, but that people want us to do it, and there is a problem. We can't just magic this up, so there is a process to go through. So thanks to people who've worked hard on this. I think this is an area where I think we're increasingly seeing areas of concern and looking to colleagues within housing to be able to help both good landlords and good tenants and push bad landlords and bad tenants to do things much better. Colleagues, are you happy for this to go forward out to consultation? Darren?
Thanks, Gerald. I'm happy with that, but we need to make 2 changes in order to facilitate that to the existing recommendations. In recommendation 1, we need to change that to say that this council will start the consultation process on an additional licensing scheme. And then in order to make sure the consultation documents are right, I'm suggesting that we change the final sentence of recommendation 6 to say that this consultation will start on the 23rd of May 2022 with any drafting changes delegated to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. That will enable landlords, university and other colleagues to work together to try and make the documents right, particularly not just additional licensing, but we'll also be consulting on things like space standards and all those sorts of things, which have been the subject of many a tribunal, which have not all gone one way. So I think those drafting changes will give us the flexibility during the PERDA period to get this consultation right rather than rushed, and then I look forward to the outcome later on this year. If that's okay,
colleagues, with those alterations from Darren, are you happy with this? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Moving on then, the update on street homelessness and rough sleeping. Lovely, Lauren.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is an information-only report to achieve 3 things as set out in the purpose. So to provide an update to Cabinet on the rough sleeping services currently available in the city. It provides an update of the street homelessness and rough sleeping partnership strategy running from 2018 to 2020, and also to provide an update on a bid for further rough sleeping initiative funding to enable our services to continue for the period from 2022 to 2025. So just to provide some context...
Teresa, I'm going to be difficult. I'm really sorry.
What?
Can you assume that we've read it?
Yes, of course.
Is there anything new that we need to say? I took more time over the previous one because I knew it was going to be, there was a lot of debate around it. But is there anything that new that's not in the report?
No, everything's set out in the report.
No. And I think we would all want to record our thanks to the incredible change there's been and the work that's happened for support for people who are homeless. I think it's an area where we learned from the pandemic, and the quality of the support now given is a completely different thing, and I'm sure everybody would want to record our thanks to you and all your colleagues for all that work. Cal, I know you'd want to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've just got a few comments on this. I won't go into as much detail as the previous item, but it's something I just wanted to kind of reflect on. As people may know, my background prior to becoming a councillor was working in homelessness services, so I've got some kind of perspective on it from that angle as a frontline worker. And in fact, it was probably that experience of working in those services that really led me to take an interest in what the local council was doing, what its housing policy is, and kind of led to me standing for election myself. I just wanted to kind of support the report and recognise the progress that has been made over the past couple of years. Clearly, local services have changed significantly, prompted by the pandemic, but obviously hopefully the legacy will outlast that. We've now got a significant number of new bed spaces available in places like the Registry and Elm Grove, which is all positive for lots of those people are people who would otherwise be on the streets or sofa surfing or otherwise homeless. So expanding that capacity of those services to house people is something that is certainly to be welcomed, and obviously a lot of massively good work has gone into that on behalf of the council and those service providers. Also for involvement with others in the room on the cross-party homelessness working group, we've been able to get a really good insight on a kind of regular basis into exactly what's happening in the services, how they're developing, how people are being supported to try and resolve their homelessness. I just thought it worth saying that just a very brief point about the use of the voluntary and community sector to provide these services, because this is something that was a topic of discussion at full council, where we were arguing for a position that public services should be provided directly by the public sector, and I think the Lib Dem group made the point that, well, actually, there's lots of good work that happens in the voluntary and community sector, and we wouldn't want to exclude them, which I recognise, and I think the service providers involved in Portsmouth do a good job, and they obviously benefit from being specialised within that particular field. But again, from the perspective of the workers, I think we do need to recognise, actually, that there's people doing really important work there, often not on good wages. They haven't got access to a public sector pension. There's people, for example, I know, I won't name the service, but there's a service in Portsmouth that used to be provided by the public sector, was then outsourced to one of the charities that provides the homelessness services. So there's now people in there that were two-peed over on council paying conditions, doing exactly the same job as someone that's come in new to the role. There's a 10 grand difference in pay every year between the person that was two-peed over and the person that's come in since. And I just think it's worth recognising that, because when we talk about whether services should be provided by the council or by the voluntary and community sector, actually there is often a big differential in paying conditions. And if we're going to recognise the important work that people do, I think it's important that they're paid properly and have access to decent terms and conditions as well. So there's a slight aside, but a point I wanted to make. And just a last point around something that's come out of kind of people's experiences of the services, but also more recently through the work of the Homelessness Partnership Board in terms of potential gap in services, or where services may need to continue to develop going forward. And that is for that cohort of people for who shared accommodation isn't appropriate or isn't suitable, or they for various reasons, quite often fairly good ones, are unable to cope in that environment. And particularly, I mean, a model that I'm interested in, and I know there's been a lot of kind of research and publicity around in recent years, is Housing First. So that's a model that's specifically aimed at those individuals that may not be up to living in a hostel environment or supported housing environment with lots of other people in similar situations. So I think we just need to recognise that there's, and I know people do recognise this, but there's always a need for kind of continuous development and progress and trying to fill in those gaps where they exist. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Darren.
Thanks, Gerald, and also thank you, Cal, for those comments as well. I think one of the interesting things about dealing with rough sleepers since we Liberal Democrats resumed control in 2018 of this authority is how we've changed the narrative. Those of us who are old enough remember long debates about sweeping homeless people, sweeping rough sleepers out Commercial Road, which took a couple of hours of full council meeting time, which is sadly 2 hours of my life I haven't got back. Since then, we have changed the discussion around a whole series of liberal political principles. The idea that you don't save or you don't sweep people who sleep rough, you actually treat them as human beings and you treat them as individuals, which is quite rare in 2018, but is now just occupies a huge political consensus across the city. The fact that the idea is not just to treat people who sleep rough or tackle people who sleep rough, but try and stop it happening in the first place. Indeed, one of the arguments for doing additional licensing and the whole private rented sector strategy that we have is actually to stop people becoming homeless, because we know the biggest cause of homelessness in this city is landlords kicking out their tenants. So we have to change that. It's been a bit of a battle, I have to say, with government, but I'm delighted that government has now woken up and understood that the principles this administration has adopted are worthwhile and are helping us do that across the city. I know nationally we're recognised as one of the best providers of homelessness services in England. We certainly keep getting a lot of money from people who've even got more money, I can say today, to try and help people who have left prison in order to help them get into decent accommodation. So I'm delighted that there is a huge political consensus, and I want to thank both Cal and the Conservative spokesman for Housing, Councillor Scott Pater Harris, for their support for those principles. Also establishing a multi-agency, cross-party working group that doesn't actually fall out is the first thing you said in your leader's speech when we resumed control of the council, Gerald, we would do, and it has actually worked incredibly well. So we are leading the country, in my view, on these issues, but as Cal has said, we always have to learn. We have to find out how we can make it better. Nothing is perfect, and that requires being open with each other, being open with each other's disagreements, which has occasionally happened, but recognising the huge political consensus that we've got in the city, and most importantly of all, that means we're able to change people's lives. Because people's lives have been changed as a result of what is in here, and I'm delighted to be part of a team that has done that. Gerald, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, folks. Anybody else Thank you very much indeed. Everybody happy with this? Thanks very much indeed. Okay, Horatio Leamington. James, there you are.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Cabinet. I will just keep this brief because you've got the report and it does speak for itself, but just to draw attention to a few highlights. So firstly, the report is doing a number of things. It is giving Cabinet an update on various strands of work. And in essence, the deconstruction of the two tower blocks, Leamington House, Horatio House, is on track. Both blocks will be fully deconstructed by the end of summer, early autumn. The report also draws attention to the work with the community in that area, and I think we can genuinely say that that engagement is leading to something that's a co-design, co-produced design for the scheme going forward. And the report draws attention to the discussions with Homes England, and it's that discussion that's really helped us to inform how we bring this development forward, which is the primary purpose in terms of the decisions in this report. So in the recommendations, we outline the decisions that you're asked to make today, which are focused on how to deliver this development for the City Council. In recommendation 2.2, you'll see that we're treating the scheme as two separate schemes in effect. It doesn't mean the master plan won't focus on the whole, but it's sensible to attract as much funding as possible that we consider the affordable housing scheme, which is the part of the scheme which the City Council will own and manage going forward, so new council housing, separate to the element which will be the private housing piece. And in the report, the diagram in 4.14 is probably quite helpful in showing that blocks A, C and D, which will provide 277 units, are the council housing part of this development, and it's block B, which will be developed by a third party. In 5.3 there's a summary of what the scheme will deliver, which I hope is helpful. And then in the recommendation 2.3, we're asking Cabinet to agree in principle, so not a decision today necessary, but in principle that Block B, the land which is owned by the HRN General Fund, is disposed of. And we reference to a third party. Naturally, PCC will wish to consider its own housing development company, and although we've suggested a range of delegations which are already available to you, that could easily be done via a further report coming back to Cabinet should you wish. The rest of the delegations in there are fairly straightforward and then that allow us to maintain the momentum and bring this development through to fruition. Lastly from me, in 2.9, I've just draw attention to the fact that there's an opportunity for you to place on record a note of thanks to the local community and the stakeholders, not the process, and I agree there's much that we can celebrate in terms of how the engagement has worked, but actually those individuals in that local community and the stakeholders who from day one have shown a really strong commitment to the scheme, and that's why, again, I would sort of reinforce that we have something which I think is genuinely co-design scheme. It's the community that are leading the design and shape of that development. And although it sounds cheesy, I do think genuinely and sincerely that we have on our hands an exciting new beginning for this part of Somerstown. I'm joined by with Stuart Palmer and Wayne Layton if there are any questions. As ever, this report is, many hands go into this. It's a teamwork between a number of directorates in the City Council and a scheme that I think we can rightly be proud of.
Thanks. Cal.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few brief comments on this. Firstly, to recognise the kind of work that's gone into it. I think both deconstruction, so I've offered the opportunity to go and look around the site as it's being deconstructed, which was quite an eye-opening and interesting experience, and to see the work that the contractor's doing there. And it's good to hear about the very high levels of materials they're able to recycle or reuse in some way, so it's not just all going on the scrap heap. And of course the ability to do that in a way that's sensitive to the community, because there are people who have bedrooms and living rooms literally kind of 10 or 20 metres away from the block, so it's important that that's managed properly as it seems to be so far. Similarly with the community engagement work, I'm sure everyone here would recognise that that has been done to a very high standard in a way that has genuinely, I think, included the local community and the stakeholders and brought people with the project so that people feel that they've got a proper say in the way in which their part of the city develops going forward. Just a quick point in terms of the recommendation, and I know James has touched on, and we have discussed this outside of this meeting, but I'll echo the point now. In terms of the wording of 2.3, so the disposal of Block B, I think I understand the reason for breaking this up into kind of two separate parts of development for reasons of grant funding and the way in which the project's running, and I kind of support that. But I do think the disposal of Block B is a significant decision that should come back to a public meeting, because the way in which the recommendation is currently worded, although it gives the option that it may go to Ravelin or it may go to a registered social landlord or housing association, the current wording also leaves open the option for it to be sold to a private developer who could do what they want with it potentially, and may try and get out of the affordable housing they provide, or may use it for a purpose that the council doesn't support. So, yeah, if possible, I'd like to make a suggestion that that does come back to a public meeting, so that as opposition councillors and members of the public, we have the opportunity to be aware of what is happening and kind of feed into that decision at the point that it's taken. Thank you.
Okay, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo really what Cal said and James has pointed out around the community engagement, as both a ward councillor and cabinet member for communities, I want to extend my thanks to Mary Devaney, Tim Raw and others who have done a spectacular job around the community engagement. My biggest thanks goes to the people of Somerstown who have really engaged with the process. And will continue to do so. I know they're all in, I think. For example, the last Saturday of November, last year it was very cold, it was very wet, and over 250 people came out to contribute to the Somerstown Gallery, which is a bit of public art that is around one of the hoardings, which is just amazing. So thank you to people of Somerstown, thank you to the officers that are involved, and as a member of the community panel, I'm looking forward to seeing things progress.
Thanks. Darren?
Thanks, Gerald, and thank you for the kind words from Chris and from Calla. I know James didn't want to do cheese, but I would do a full gorgonzola and brie sandwich of cheese with regards to various stages of this project. Firstly, when it comes to the community engagement, the principles that this administration established from listening over the decades to people in Somerstown who had said, well, they do things to us, they don't care about us. That has changed massively with the community engagement projects that have been put forwards. We have provided some principles, and some of which Cal has already outlined. The principles that the homes and the whole project must be as green as possible, that the rents must be as low as possible, that we must have as much council housing and social housing as possible, and these proposals indicate that we will have more than 272 council homes that we had before at the end of this process. Those principles have strangely worked. And people have begun to engage in a much greater way than certainly I think I'd hoped for at the start. And I think that's actually working. And so we're coming up with things that actually local people want. And strangely, if you put local people in charge, they will do things that will work. Empowering communities, even a more disparate community than might otherwise have been the case here in Somerstown, is good. And also we want to try and make sure that Somerstown is a place where people want to go to. Too often I get people who say, I don't want to go to Somerstown, and that's not right. We want to try and change that narrative, and that's what the community engagement proposals, community panel and various other activities have done. With regards to Cal's point about the disposal of the land, I agree. I think that we have to be as open, as transparent as possible, and I would propose altering one of the recommendations, Gerald, to say that a report should come back to Cabinet to allow this body to agree any final disposal of Block B. But I think by working together, we've strangely got something I think we can be proud of. It's led by local people, not by people who will never live in council housing. That's a major change, and it's a major change for the better. And I'm delighted to put this paper forwards, and I look forward to see what the panel finally comes up with. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues. Anybody else? No? Okay, I think with that change in recommendation to say it's going to come back, that's fine. Ben, are you running away? Excellent. Colleagues are happy with that? Yep. Okay. Thanks very much indeed. National bus strategy, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The enhanced partnership is the third stage of the process set out in the National Bus Strategy to deliver improvements to bus services for Portsmouth residents. The plan recognises that lower bus fares are the top priorities for residents and proposes, subject to funding, new cheaper tickets available on both first and stagecoach services. It also proposes measures to make bus journey times shorter and more reliable, improve passenger satisfaction and offer better evening, Sunday and early morning journeys. Today, Cabinet is asked to approve the draft Enhanced Partnership Plan and Scheme, which must be submitted by the 29th of April 2022. The partnership would establish a formal agreement between the City Council and bus operators, overseen by an Enhanced Partnership Board on which both partners are represented, to direct and scrutinise delivery of the plan. Any proposed changes to the plan would come as recommendations to this Cabinet. Funding is yet to be confirmed, but Portsmouth was one of only 5 authorities named in the Levelling Up White Paper on the 2nd of February. Councillor Stagg and officers held a meeting with the Department for Transport, officers from the Treasury and a representative of 10 Downing Street on the 17th of February to discuss Portsmouth's proposals. This has been followed by a series of detailed questions. This is an opportunity for buses to support City Council objectives for health, economy, air quality and access to employment, education and training. It supports the imagined Portsmouth objectives of a green city with excellent air quality and easy travel.
Peter, thanks very much indeed. Lynn.
Thank you. This is something I welcome very much. Partnership is the obvious way to go because apart from anything else, it is a legal requirement on both sides, on the part of the bus companies and Portsmouth City Council, to improve our bus services in the city. But I must stress that it's to improve the bus services for sustainability. It's not a case of if we get the money, which hopefully we will, of putting in the money and that's it, end, we've got the money in. It depends very much on people using the buses. So if the money is going in to improve the quality of the services, so faster times, better journey times, comfort of journeys, etc., people have got to use the buses because the bus companies, whether we like it or not, they're not charities, they are private companies and they have to make a profit. And if it costs as much to run a bus with one passenger as it does with 53, so you have to have more people on the buses. And I'm not being anti-cars here. People accuse me of being anti-cars. I'd be lost without my car, I must admit. But it's trying to get people out of their cars more often, to use their cars less often than they do already. It's to improve our air quality, is to cut down congestion on our roads, which are contributing to poor air quality, loss of business, because I think this country as a whole loses somewhere in the region of £8 billion a year just from being delayed on roads, and of course all the extra cars that we have on the roads. And I found out something only yesterday actually in a meeting of the Transport for the South East, that the prediction is that car ownership is going to rise by 23%. Which is really quite horrifying. I mean, we haven't got the room in Portsmouth for 23% more cars. So I think this partnership, if it goes through and it's supported all the way along the line, is the answer that we need to support. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Anybody else? No, everybody happy with this? Thank you very much indeed. Pesticides, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I shall keep this brief. So
Hurrah.
this is it's an information paper to update Cabinet on the use of pesticides on City Council land and representative of the 3 services that currently use those in maintaining the parks and amenity spaces, communal areas surrounding council housing stock and highway infrastructure, and therefore relevant to the Parks and Open Spaces team, Housing's Green and Clean team and the appointed highways contractor COLAS. The report sets out current use, indicating the types of product used and their targeted purpose. This includes reference to glyphosate, the most commonly used herbicide, that's been subject to close scrutiny over a number of years. The usage table reflects how teams have worked to reduce dependency on glyphosate over the last 5 years. This downward trend reflects the concerted effort to restricting use to a minimum, whereby all treatments are targeted with no preventative treatments carried out. The report is also an opportunity to emphasise the measures teams have been taking to reduce and minimise the use of pesticides, or to use alternative methods of control where these are available. At present, we don't consider there to be a viable alternative that is as effective and meets the city's cost and resource constraints, but we're very much working towards a reduced and minimal use of pesticides and adopting alternatives where we can. The report lists the alternative treatments that have been investigated to date, briefly setting out the pros and cons of these alternatives that are on the market or have been adopted by other authorities for certain circumstances. Some have been trialled to a greater extent than others, such as the use of the mechanical sweepers as detailed in Appendix A, and this touches on other considerations such as the welfare of staff and hand and arm vibration syndrome. There's an ongoing process of engagement with product suppliers and other local authorities, and we're continuing to assess alternative pesticide-free solutions or integrated methods. Section 3.7 of the report, therefore, sets out how we will continue our approach to minimising use of pesticides and how they'll be used where they're still required. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you. We're clearly using different dictionaries for the word short. Harsh. All right. All right. I apologise, Adrian. You can continue to witter and to speak with great erudition and knowledge. David, Mr. Ashmore, this is your portfolio.
Thanks, Leader. Well, it actually crosses several portfolios, doesn't it, really? It's on the public highway, and it's something to do with greening as well, and climate change. So, yeah, it's really positive to see that the work's been going on. Obviously, there's a lot of people want us to end pesticide use overnight, and this gives an illustration as to why we can't do that immediately. But it's good to see that we've investigating the alternatives, like the manual removal of the weeds, for example, and doing the cost analysis of that. So, you know, it's to see, to give a further look at how that would look in the future and what kind of resources we've got to put into it, or what kind of resources we can ask for at a local government level. But yeah, it's interesting to see what's been done, the research that's been going on, and that will continue to be going on, and that it's the recommendations, you know, to go to as minimal as possible. I think that's the best we can do at this stage, and that's what we're aiming for. So yeah, I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. Colleagues, anyway, it's a very helpful report and lots of interesting stuff that I didn't know. Oh, Uncle Hugh.
Yes, I think I certainly welcome this report, and the point which has impressed me, looking around the leafier parts of Southsea, is the steps that the Council are taking to minimise the use of pesticides. This is getting a lot of public approval, and rightly so. And I think that the officers must be commended for the way in which they've pushed this forward.
Thank you, colleagues. Are you happy with the report, and thank the officers for all the work that they've done on this? Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. Memorial benches, Tristram.
Thank you, Leader.
Presume we've read it.
I'm going to assume ready, and you've read it, but give a brief introduction. Hopefully you can bear with. The report is for noting. It's to inform Cabinet and that the plans for the memorial benches affected by the Southsea Seafront project, and to update you on the communication with bench owners. Part of the sea defence work means that benches will need to be replaced. The team recognise that these benches are valued and much loved, and that this issue needs to be treated with some care. There are some data issues. There are a number of people who we are struggling to get hold of, so we've come up with a process, a three-step process here that hopefully considers the issues and treats it with some sensitivity, and hopefully will deliver a positive outcome and a fantastic new sea defence scheme with the public realm, which gives places for these memorial benches in a new format.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Uncle Hugh.
Yeah, this is necessary. We can't develop the sea defences without removing the benches. The aim is to provide better benches and to return the plaques to the benches wherever possible. We've contacted everybody we could contact, but the important thing here is that even where we have not been able to contact people, and a large number have not been able to contact, we have an option which preserves the plaques for the length of time for which they were purchased. I think this is a good report and I commend it.
Thank you very much indeed. I completely support it. Lynn.
A little personal thing. There's a bench in the seafront for my, in memory of my ex-father-in-law. I contacted my ex-husband because he had moved, and he contacted the team, who replied to him within 24 hours, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. So thank you to them. Okay,
thank you. And I think you're right. This is really important to people. This memorial to their loved ones, and I'm pleased that we're doing it with such sensitivity. Okay, colleagues, are you okay with this? And this is the strategy to move forward? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Members' champions, says James Harris, who's now no longer here. Colleagues, are you happy with the written reports that have come from the members' champions? Chris?
Yes, no, happy with the report, Chair, but just a couple of thanks from me. First to James Harris for his work on the revised member champions protocol that he worked on last year. And my thanks to Councillors Hunt, Vernon Jackson, Brown, Mellor, and Barrett for their updates and for their continued work as member champions.
Thanks so much indeed. Okay, colleagues, you're right with. I think this is a good thing that there actually is a written report, because we haven't had it from people in the past, and I think it is a useful thing to be doing. Okay, thanks very much indeed. LED street lighting, Caroline. Thank you. Anything to add to the report?
Just to note that obviously this came for decision making in February 2020, and at that point we thought that we would save about 140 tonnes of carbon, and when we reviewed in 2022 we'd saved 295. That wasn't noted in the paper, so I wanted to bring it to members' attention, and also to note that whilst we saved 82,000 on the adaptive lighting profile, that is obviously in addition to the 500,000 we had saved in the cost of our energy by upgrading to LED in the previous years.
Thanks so much indeed. That's really helpful stuff. Lynn, anything you'd like to add?
Just to say, Susie and I went to the first trial, didn't we? Oh, not trial, it was a demonstration. We were very impressed by it. We were also at the second one, and Dave was with us as well on that occasion. And it was good to have a cross-section of people, because there was somebody who was partially sighted, and then we had community wardens, police, etc. there, and all giving their opinions. So really consultative. A small group of people, but they give them their opinions back. The one thing that really pleased me, apart from the saving of carbon, etc., was the fact that we've now got a map showing well-lit places, because that is very important, particularly for women and girls. We're trying to protect the safety of women and girls, and to them be able to see where it's safe to go at night when it's dark, when they are well lit, because not all the streets are, because it's adaptive lighting, some places are better lit than others. So very, very good, yes.
Okay, colleagues happy with this? Yep, okay, thank you. Richard, impact of construction costs. Tell me construction costs are coming down.
Construction costs aren't coming down, Gerald, Chair. But I have no further comments to add to the paper.
I thought it was really interesting, but it really showed the problem we've got, doesn't it, Richard, in terms of the way in which costs are going through the roof for anything. And I see David Moorman here, who has really experience of this in terms of the costs of Brownsbury. So looking at 20+% increases, and more and more. Are you all right, Peter? You're okay. It wasn't us you're vexed with. No, that's right. But I am very worried with what it's going to do, because we are becoming we're becoming quite a big developer in the city, and if construction costs are going through the roof, as they appear to be, that's going to be very problematic. And the feedback I get is it's quite often difficult to get people to bid for things because contractors are so busy. So real pressure. Richard, thanks for anything else you want to add, Richard? No, Susie?
No, just on the basis of what you were saying, I also think it's worth noting that we've been caught up in what were capital proposals from the previous year and now dealing with these increases in costs. So whilst you're talking about the future, we're actually caught in a really difficult situation at the present based on the capital commitments that we made.
Okay, I thought it was really important for the council to know what the reality of some of this stuff is like. So thanks very much indeed for that, folks. Okay, Falklands 40, Armed Forces Day, David.
Thank you, Leader. There's nothing really to add to the report that was submitted. Things are going quite well. Falklands 40th is almost, to use the expression, put to bed. We've got one or two things left to do, but all the meetings with stakeholders have gone very well, and we're all ready to go with that. The Armed Forces Day, slightly different. That's in the Historic Naval Base, and now we're putting together a programme of tattoo events, very similar to the scoping document that was seen with the report.
Okay, I think I really welcome us doing this. It's right that we recognise the contribution of the armed forces in this city. We're the home of the Royal Navy, and my thanks to everybody involved in the naval parade we had in the pouring rain about 10 days ago. I talked to the Lord Lieutenant who said when he got home his wife put him in the airing cupboard for him to drip all night, and he was taken out the next morning dry. Colleagues, are you happy with this? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, lateral flow testing from the end of this month. Helen.
Thank you, Leader. So, you've got the paper, and I will take it as read because I don't want to get told off. So the recommendations in the paper. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update on the arrangements for COVID-19 testing in Portsmouth from April 2022, following the recent government announcement on the 21st of February that testing will end or universal testing will end for the majority of people. There will still be testing available for high-risk settings like the care sector, NHS and care sector. And we've also set out the options available for supporting continued testing in Portsmouth, and you'll see there in the report there are 3 options and put forward for recommendation. I'll quickly just go through them. So option A is maintain the status quo from the 1st of April. Testing will reduce in line with current government plans. Option B is to retain testing capacity, and I should have just said this is lateral flow device asymptomatic testing. All PCR symptomatic testing will end on March the 30th, and the testing sites across the country will then be stood down. So these 3 options are for asymptomatic testing. So I've covered option A. Option B is to retain asymptomatic testing capacity to provide tests for vulnerable people, those caring for and living and working with vulnerable people, outbreak and surge capacity. And then option C, which is option B, plus the provision of home test kits to households until A, a 3-month period commencing from April 22, so that will be April through till June, has elapsed, or a maximum of 30,000 home test kits have been provided, which is equivalent to an uptake of approximately 10% of households. Or C, that is option C. So those are the 3 options, and also just to note that we delegate to the Director of Public Health and the Section 151 officer after consultation with the Leader of the Council to amend the delivery of the above selected options if there is change in government policy or local context impacting on public health requirements to mitigate, manage COVID-19. Put that in because we are still aware that there is discussion happening in government about next steps with living with COVID, because you will be aware that we are currently seeing quite an upsurge in cases. And then note the an additional report will be presented to Cabinet if further proposals for testing arrangements within Portsmouth are to be considered. And just to mention, since the paper was published, we have seen an increase in cases. Well, we're currently, as of yesterday, at 1,016 cases of COVID-19 per 100,000 population. So that is quite a significant upsurge. So I will leave it there.
Thanks, Helen. We've seen a substantial increase in the number of people testing positive. We've also seen a substantial increase in the last few weeks in the number of people in hospital, and we know death rates follow that. I think the government has been wrong to stop doing free lateral flow tests to residents. I think lots of people want to be responsible and they want to do the right thing, and they want to know if they are testing positive before they go and visit somebody who's vulnerable, before they go and see other people, friends and family, because they don't want to give other people this disease. I've known people who've died of it, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So I think it is right that we try to step in and fill the gap that the government is leaving by going for the option that does both free lateral flow tests but all the other things as well. And I think it is the responsible thing to do to support people in our city who want to do the right thing and want to be responsible. Pretending that this pandemic has disappeared and by stopping people doing testing, it seems to be the wrong thing to do. It's better for people to have information and be able to make decisions based on information is right. If we get through all of the numbers of lateral flow test kits that we've got, and we've got 30,000 boxes of them, then I expect we'll have to come back here to Cabinet to look again. But we will see if that happens. It may be that people don't want to do this, but we don't know. But I think we should help people in our city who want to be responsible do the right thing, and therefore I'm happy to propose this. And I don't think we should be having to do this. I think this is something the government should be doing, but the government won't, and I think it's therefore our responsibility to step in. Colleagues, Jason.
There isn't a whole lot further to add, since I think you and Helen have been quite descriptive in the way you've presented and outlaid the report. Just to really echo your comments, and it's disappointing in a way, because I think you're right, Leader, the fact that people got bored of COVID, it seems, towards the end. Understandable. 2 years of a pandemic is a difficult situation for people to face. However, you know, it's been swept off the front pages by the situation in the Ukraine. But the facts, if it takes you a few seconds to look them up, and it's extremely worrying. I mean, what the latest figures, 226,000 cases nearly logged from the weekend. Hospital cases up, deaths up, highest number of hospitalisations in Scotland at the moment. And for a snapshot, look at the Lib Dem group here. You know, I don't think we're a particularly unhealthy group, but COVID has fairly ripped through the ranks of the Lib Dems. I think at least 4 or 5 of us have had it in recent weeks. Kimberley's off now, partners have had it, so it shows you what it's doing. It's still very much there. Vaccines now are starting to wane, so we're looking towards the next programme, whenever that will be, sometime in sometime in autumn. So yes, this is a step to take in the right direction. Clearly I'd like government to do more. I think it was too early to stop the programme. The Freedom Day has been marked by the fact that the huge number of rising cases since. So, yes, this will help, but I think more still needs to be done, and I'd look for a lead from central government, but I don't think that's coming at the moment, unfortunately, like the cases which are. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I think the other thing we need to say is if we do this, we are the first council in the country to do this, but I don't think that's a reason not to do it. If it's the right thing to do, we should be doing it. And I would expect others to follow once they know that this is what we've done. Colleagues, are you happy to go with those recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Q3 budget monitoring. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just provide a few brief comments on this report. The purpose of this report is to update members on the forecast outturn position of the Council as at the end of December 2021. The forecast position of the Council is showing a net overspend of 13.7 million, mainly arising from the impact of COVID-19 and other windfall costs, as set out in the report. However, the budget approved by City Council included provision to meet the estimated COVID costs. The net position of the General Fund after the release of the contingency provision to fund the COVID-19 and other windfall costs is a net forecast overspend of 1.49 million, as shown at the table at paragraph 4.2. After accounting for the transfers to and from the portfolio reserves, there is a remaining forecast overspend at the end of Q3 of circa 803,000, as shown at the table at paragraph 4.3. Despite this overspend, the Council is forecast to remain within its minimum level of general reserves for 21-22, and further details of the individual portfolio variances can be found in section 5 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Colleagues, any comments on the report? Or are you happy with this? Thanks very much indeed. Moving on then, we've got David with, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my way through all of the paperwork. Renegotiation of the leisure, sports and leisure facilities contracts. Do you need us to move into exempt session, David?
I think we can discuss it without doing so, Leader.
Okay.
We could, if subsequently members want to discuss the exempt appendix, we can do.
Colleagues, I'm always keen to do as much of this in open as possible. Are you happy, colleagues happy to discuss this in open session? Thank you very much indeed. David, if you want to just introduce this quickly.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, briefly, this report seeks authorisation from the Cabinet as a key decision to vary the pyramids, vary the Council's main sports and leisure management contract in two ways. The first way is to include the pyramids within that main contract as an additional site, something we can do in compliance with public contract regulations. And secondly is to agree a new financial deal with the operator, which changes the balance of risk in a way that allows the operator to have more confidence in that it can operate sustainably, but also incentivises them to drive up revenues to return use to pre-COVID levels and to maintain revenues for the Council's budgets.
Okay, David, thank you very much. It has been pointed out to me, we need to say there's been a forward plan admission notice because this should have been, we should have had this agenda in a different way. Colleagues, are you happy to look at this even though it didn't get onto the forward plan? Yeah, okay, thank you. Cal.
Thank you, Chair. Just a technical point really on this report and the later report on the waste collection services. Obviously, none of the contents of the report have been put into the public domain by publication of the agenda. I note that there is information that clearly can be shared in the public domain. It's going to be discussed in this meeting. So my suggestion would be that in future it would be good practice to put as much information as possible into the public domain. I don't see why we can't publish a summary report that contains the information that isn't exempt, and then obviously exempt an appendix which contains that confidential information. Otherwise, from my perspective as opposition councillor and members of the public, we don't know what's going on.
I agree, and I think with the waste one, that's exactly where we got to, that there's a short open report with an appendix. Thanks very much indeed, David. Because I talk to people around the country in terms of where leisure contracts are, the pandemic has been really, really difficult for many organisations. Quite a few councils have been left with either having to find a large amount of money to bail out their leisure contracts, or the contractor has left. And that's proved problematic for quite a few places. It seems to be that David and his team have renegotiated this contract in a remarkably sensible way. Ben.
Thank you, Leader. I'll keep it very short, as I understand that is the theme of today's meeting.
In which case we have failed miserably.
Thank you, Leader. As you say, Devon team have done very well, and actually BHI have proved a really positive partner, both in terms of the whole time they've held the leisure contract, but particularly during COVID. I think they've demonstrated the ability to serve the public and our residents in a really positive fashion, and have proven a strong partner for the council. So what's being proposed going forward both represents value for money, but also a sensible way forward that means people, both the council gets a good deal, but also local residents get a good service.
Okay, colleagues, anybody else, or are we happy with this? Okay, thank you very much indeed, David. Coming on to the next one, which is the with the waste contract. Before that, I'm very sorry, just to say, I didn't do the minutes. So, colleagues, right at the beginning of the agenda, there were minutes of previous meetings. Are you happy with those minutes? Thank you. Democratic Services will be overjoyed. In terms of the waste contract, I think we'll need to do some of this discussion in closed session, but I think it's sensible, if it's okay, for Colette to introduce this. I have never done, Anna, something in closed session when we're doing it like this. What did you... We stopped recording and broadcasting. For the decision. Okay, so Colette, if you want to start.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to set out the purpose and recommendations before we move to the exempt session. The report will provide Cabinet with the information required to inform the decision on the delivery method for waste collection services in the City from the 1st of October 2023 and sets out the implementation timescales involved in the various options. So the report has 3 recommendations. The first one is that Cabinet considers the options for the City's future waste collection service with careful attention paid to the opportunities and risks, including the financial consequence to the City Council for each option. Recommendation 2 is that the Cabinet take a decision on which option will deliver waste collection services from the 1st of October 2023, noting that any of the options will require the work to implement the decision to start immediately to ensure service continuity. And or approve extension of the contract until 31st of March 2024 to enable the required timescales of the implementation to be met. And the third recommendation is that Cabinet takes the opportunity to commend the work of the PCC Waste Management Team and the contractor BIFA for their response during the pandemic in maintaining the City's residential waste collection services, noting the largely uninterrupted service delivery throughout the pandemic, which also included service improvements and the rollout of additional food waste rounds. The options that you'll be asked to consider are as follows. Option 1 is that waste collection services are brought in-house, and for this option, no extension to the contract is required. The second option is that waste collection services be delivered by a company that's PCC owned and using the TECL provision to award service provision to the company directly. For this option, a detailed business case is required for the Council to give final approval of the creation of a company using the TECL exemption, and an extension of the contract of 6 months is required. And the third option is that waste collection services are subject to procurement for an external contractor, as they are now, and an extension of 6 months will also be required for that. And then any decision made will need to be communicated quickly to stakeholders affected.
Okay, colleagues. I think we do need a proper discussion of this. So, as we are in closed session, I'm sorry, Anna, if you could go. Thank you very much indeed, Anna.